We're talking about observance and the reasons for observance. And as I mentioned, there's a tension between the spirit of the law and the actions of the law. And obviously, every religion deals with that differently. I'd say that more liberal denominations of Judaism err on the side of the spirit and not necessarily the law and the prescriptive actions. Obviously, the danger in that, as I mentioned, is that you lose the forest for the trees and you just end up with a spiritual feeling, but it isn't really a discipline. It really doesn't engage deeply. The Obviously the danger, let's say in a more traditional observance, is that you might get overly focused on the actions and forget the spirit. You might forget what the actions are supposed to do for you, bring you to. Now, this actually is an argument in the Talmud. The Talmud says, I think I've mentioned this before. There's a piece of Talmud which is talking about prayer, and in the old days, prayer was not written in books. Obviously, there weren't a lot of books. The person leading the prayers would compose the prayer, but within certain specific themes. The Amidah, the standing silent prayer, has a certain amount of blessings in it. Each one has a theme, but within each of those blessings, it seems clear that the person leading the prayer would, on some level, riff. And so the Talmud says, what if the person leading the prayer says, even unto a bird's nest does your mercy extend. Right now, what are they talking about? They're talking about the commandment in the Bible to shoo away the mother bird before you take the eggs. And so the Talmud says, the Mishnah says actually earlier in the Talmud, it says if somebody is leading the service and they say that as a way of being poetic, you quiet them. So the Talmud says, why do you quiet them? So there's an argument in the Talmud about why. One opinion is that the Torah here is, if you say even unto a bird's nest your mercy extends, Talmud says that's true, but you're going to make the other animals feel jealous. And you don't want to make the animals feel jealous by saying, but just talking about how God has a special rule about shooing away the mother bird. Now, the truth is, we have other rules about, let's say, not slaughtering a mother and its child on the same day, not plowing an ox and a donkey together because they pull at, different speeds. So there is obviously, there is a commandment about not giving pain to animals. But in this case, you're praying and you're specifying God's mercy to the bird. Talmud says you're going to make the other animals feel bad. Now, obviously, the animals don't necessarily have feelings. They're certainly not in the synagogue listening to you lead the prayers. So, what is that about? So, the commentaries say it's not obvious. It's really not about the animals. It's really about you. In other words, that if you do that, you'll be compromising your own sensitivity toward creatures, and we have to cultivate sensitivity, and perhaps that will also impact your sensitivity toward people. But the other opinion in the Talmud is that it has nothing to do with that. It's because this person, by saying that, is 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 viewing all the commandments as if they are about a certain end, as if they're about mercy. And the Talmud says you could say that at least according to this opinion, that the reason for the commandments is not that. There is no reason for the commandments. They are just the command of the king. That's why we do them. We don't do them because of the reason. We don't do them because they're an expression of, in this case, mercy. So that's an argument in the Talmud. No, and if you think about it, it's actually a very fundamental argument in the nature of theology. Does what we do, do ritual commandments? Let's say in Judaism, we have many ritual commandments that we don't understand at all. Not mixing wool and linen. So is that about somehow cultivating human sensitivity? Is that about cultivating our relationship between us and God or between us and other people? Or is that just the command of the king? Now, on the other hand, this commandment, there you could see why you might say it's just the command of the king. In this case, right, shooing away the mother bird before you take the egg seems like pretty obviously a commandment about mercy. It seems obvious that it's about your character development and about mercy on animals. Um, but even that is an argument in the Talmud. Um, that's an interesting question. How far would that go? Would you say that you're not allowed to murder? Not because it's bad, but because that's the command. That's what God commanded you. In this case, it's permitted. In this case, it's permitted. If a court says you can kill somebody, it's permitted. In war, it's permitted, but generally, it's not permitted. Why is that? If it's just about not killing, well, the answer is that's what God said. So it's an interesting question. How far would that argument go? But this idea in Judaism, the question of what's the purpose of commandments, what we call tamei mitzvah, the reason for the commandments, how should we view the commandments, is quite fundamental. I'll show you a piece of. Share my screen with you. So take a look at this piece from Maimonides. This is from Maimonides' book of Jewish philosophy, The Guide to the Perplexed. And he writes here, it is prohibited to cut off the limb of a living animal and eat it, right? That's a commandment in the Torah. It was commanded not only to Jews, but also to the children of Noah. And now, obviously, in the ancient world, people wanted to do that because it would keep the rest of the animal fresh. But the Torah forbade that. And so Maimonides writes here the reason for it. The Torah doesn't say the reason, but Maimonides writes the reason is because of cruelty. And the heathen, and Maimonides says in addition, heathen kings used to do it. So it's a way of staying away from idolatrous worship. And then he says, what about the commandment of cooking? It says, don't cook a kid in its mother's milk, right? You're not allowed to cook meat and milk together. So Maimonides says we can give a reason for that too. Now, this is not in Maimonides' book of Jewish law. Maimonides' book of Jewish law, he doesn't really give reasons. He just gives the laws. But he did write also a book of Jewish philosophy called The Guide to the Perplexed. And this is in his book of Jewish philosophy. And so he has a reason for that. Thinks it's not good for your health. I think it's probably also prohibited, he says, because of idolatry. It was an idolatrous practice, perhaps, to cook a kid in its mother's milk. I find support for this view in the circumstance of the law mentions prohibition twice after the commandment of the festivals, and that you should worship God and not idols. And then he says, and it's also forbidden to slaughter an animal and its child on the same day, in order that people should be restrained, prevented from killing the two together in such a manner that the young is slain in the sight of the mother. The pain of animals under such circumstances is very great. There's no difference in this case between the pain of man and the pain of other living beings. Its love and tenderness of the mother for her loved ones is not produced by reasoning, but by imagination. And this faculty exists not only in humans, but also in animals. And so it applies to domestic animals. It happens not to apply to wild animals. It only applies to domesticated animals. And so he gives a reason for that. He says maybe because in that, maybe among domesticated animals, somehow there's a certain relationship between the animals that there isn't among wild animals. I don't know if that's true, but that's Maimonides refers here. And he says the same reason applies to the law which enjoins that we should not take the mother bird, that we have to shoo away the mother bird if we want to take the eggs. And the eggs of which the bird sits and the young they need of their mother are generally unfit for food. When the mother is sent away, she doesn't see the taking of the young ones and does not feel any pain. In most cases, this commandment will cause man to leave the whole nest untouched. Interesting. So Maimonides says that that usually the eggs aren't what you want. Usually you want the bird. You're not allowed to take the bird. You have to shoo it away and then take the young ones. And that's not really such good food. So he says it's actually a way of the Torah sort of not allowing you to take a bird that's a wild bird in the forest. The law provides that such grief should not be caused to cattle or birds. How much more careful must we be that we not cause it to our fellow people? So that's interesting, right? Maimonides goes a step further. He says it's not just that you should be nice to animals. He seems to say here the purpose of being nice in these cases to animals is not just that, but also to cultivate a personality of mercy so that when it comes to interacting with human beings, we react in a different sort of way. And then he quotes this piece of Talmud that I just mentioned. Now, there's an interesting tradition that Jews have. If you've ever been at a Shabbat meal, you'll see that you make the blessing on the wine, and while you do that, first make a blessing on wine on Shabbat, and then you say a blessing on bread, on 2 loaves of bread. And while you make the blessing on the wine, you cover the 2 loaves of bread. And the question is, why do you do that? And if you ask Jewish people why, they will tell you if they know, they'll tell you it's because we don't want to embarrass the bread. That's what they will say. Now that seems very strange, right? Because we know that it doesn't take a scientist to know that bread doesn't have feelings. So what's going on over here? The answer is that I might have mentioned this before, that usually in the order of blessings, you would make a blessing on the bread first and then the wine. But on Shabbat, you have to say the Kiddush. You have to sanctify the day over a cup of wine. And therefore, you're going to say the blessing on the wine first and then the bread. And so you're pushing aside the bread in order to put the wine first, even though really in the order of blessings, bread should come first. And so that's the idea, is that by pushing aside the bread, somehow, you're going to, as it were, embarrass the bread. You're going to make the bread feel second fiddle. So now, obviously, we're not really concerned about bread, but I think it's the idea that Maimonides expresses here, that through the commandments, or actually, according to Maimonides, the main purpose of the commandments is to cultivate our ethical persona. And Nachmanides, who lived about 50 years after Maimonides in the 12th century, he says it also in a very beautiful way. He's talking here about this commandment of shooing away the mother bird, and he says the reason is in order not to have a cruel heart, and we have all these other commandments, not killing a mother animal and its child on the same day. And of course, it's all for the same reason. And he quotes Maimonides. And now it's interesting, Maimonides, I don't think I quoted it for you here, but by the way, Maimonides asks, what about the other opinion in the Talmud, that it's not about mercy, that it's about just the command of God? So Maimonides says very clearly, he says, we don't hold of that. He says, that's not the opinion we go with. He says, we go with the opinion that the purpose of commandments is not because it's the commandment of God alone, but because God is the great moralist. God is the great ethicist. God knows what will help to cultivate our ethical sensibilities. That's why God gives us the commandments. Maimonides says that very clearly. Nachmanides is a little bit bothered by that, and he has a slightly different answer for what we do with the other opinion in the Talmud, that opinion that it's just the command of God, and it's not about cultivating mercy. So Nachmanides does he does go with this concept that clearly the commandments are there for a purpose, and they are there to, in many instances, cultivate our sense of mercy. But why is the order of blessings bread before the wine? So it has to do with a verse in the Torah that lists. It says, "You shall eat and be satisfied and bless the Lord your God in the good land which God has given you." But it also calls the land a land of it calls it a land of grain, a land of wheat and barley, and the way that it's and a land of and then it lists the five fruits of Israel: grapes, pomegranates, olives, dates, and figs. And we learn from the juxtaposition of all the words in that verse with the word land what the order of blessings is, which ones come first and which ones come second. So that's where it comes from. I'll show it to you another time. Okay. Let's see. And then so Nachmanides here is writing about this idea, and he quotes Maimonides. He certainly believes in this idea that the purpose of commandments, that the commandments have a moral purpose, and I'll show you the English here. And then he deals with this question of the other opinion in the Talmud. Toward the end. Says the intention of all of them that is good for us and not for God. He says, first of all, it has to be this way because God doesn't need, you can't say that God needs our commandments. So it has to be for us, he says. Um, all the commandments are that his creatures be purified and cleansed, meaning us, without the dross of evil thoughts and disgusting character traits. And that which they said, now, what about that opinion in the Talmud that you quiet the person who says, unto a bird's nest even your mercy extends, because they've made the traits of the commandments of the Holy One into mercy, and it's not, it's just decrees. What do you do with that? So it's to say that God did not really worry about the nest of the bird. God wasn't really concerned about the mercy to the bird. The bird isn't going to feel emotional pain. But what God is concerned about is our cultivating our own character. So he says that's why, that's that opinion in the Talmud. That opinion in the Talmud, which thinks you quiet the person, and it's not because it's mercy to the bird, is because that opinion holds it isn't mercy to the bird. The bird doesn't need that mercy. The bird's not going to feel bad if you shoot away and take the eggs. But it is mercy in the sense that it's for you, that it's to cultivate your own, that if you do it, it's going to impact you. It will make you cruel. And since cruelty spreads in the soul of man, as is known, the Talmud says that butchers, uh, the best of the butchers are the partners of Amalek. Now, obviously, being a butcher in some level, it's a good thing. You're slaughtering animals kosher, but Talmud says, it's going to take its toll on your sensitivity, and that the commandments are there to teach us good character. Okay, so that is Maimonides and Nachmanides on this concept of the purpose of commandments. I'm going to look at the beginning of the Torah and sort of the question of why is it so important to have all of these commandments to um, to work on our own character. I mean, is it that hard to be in the world and to do what we're doing and to preserve our own? I mean, there's lots of moral people and they're not religious, right? So if you go back to the beginning of the Torah, it says that Adam knew his wife Eve. They had a child named Cain. And then we know the story of Cain and Hevel. Hevel is the word Hevel means like vanity or air. Cain is a much stronger name. And we see that Cain brings a sacrifice to God, right? He's an agriculturalist. He's a farmer, and he brings a sacrifice to God. It's Cain's idea. And Hevel also brings, but he brings the best of his sheep, right? Hevel doesn't find it hard to bring the best. He seems very giving. He seems very easygoing. And then Cain gets angry. Cain gets angry that God has turned to Abel's sacrifice. You know the story. And God says to Cain, be careful because sin crouches at the door. And nevertheless, Cain does not take God's advice. He kills his brother. God says to Cain, "Where's Hevel, your brother?" He says, "Am I my brother's guardian?" So Cain says, so God says, "Listen, the voice of your brother cries out from the ground to me, and therefore you are going to be cursed. Even though you're a farmer, you're going to have to travel. You're going to have to wander, and that's going to be your punishment." And Cain says, "How am I going to handle this?" God says, "Don't worry, I'm going to protect you. Nobody will kill you." And then it's interesting what Cain does. Cain marries a woman, and he has a child named Chanoch. Enoch means education. It means he boneir. And what does Chanoch's son do? He builds a city, and they call it after him. Now it's interesting, right? Because Cain is the one who's settled. He's a farmer, and then his curse is he has to wander. But what comes from Cain? The building of society, actually. And then this son Chanoch has these other children. A child named Lemach. Lemach has two wives. And one day, and his children, his progeny, invent all these things. One of them invents musical instruments. One of them invents implements of copper and iron. And so there's all this societal development going on in these verses in Genesis. But who do they come from? Cain. He's not, right? We usually think of him not as the good guy. We usually kind of think of him as the bad guy. Um, but but he is the guy who he is the first one who decided to bring a sacrifice to God, and he's the one in agriculture is a very serious undertaking. You can create a society on agriculture. You can't create a society as we know societies. You can't create a big city on shepherding. Shepherds wander. Shepherds are fairly poor. It's a very calm lifestyle, but you don't create big cities and technology and development of society through shepherding. You have to have agriculture because that's what makes big money. That's what feeds lots of people. And you can stay in one place, right? If you think about Israel, the south of Israel is filled with nomads, with Bedouins, because traditionally they've been shepherds and they don't live in houses. Israel would love them to live in houses, but they don't. They live in shacks, and for a little while, and then they keep moving because they have sheep they have to graze, and that's their culture. And so a lot of southern Israel is Bedouins. Um, and the reason that they don't live in cities is because they don't have agriculture, or the reason they don't have agriculture is because they don't live in cities. And society, the development of society, of technology, of people interacting with each other in big ways, that's all city oriented. And that all comes from Cain. And it fits into Cain's job, which is being a farmer. Um, Lamech is out hunting and he kills somebody. And according to the Midrash, he actually ends up killing Cain. But what's interesting is that what you learn from this is that the development of society, the development of technology, right, that's which is going to make human life easier, more developed, perhaps cultural developments, right? All of that comes with enormous dangers. The dangers of Cain, right? Cain is the guy who's strong, but it comes with dangers. It comes with dangers of killing people. It comes with, I mean, we know that technology, as much as it helps human beings, right? It for us, we understand the dangers of, all of a sudden in the 19th century, you could make clothes for everybody, and it was cheap. I mean, we take it for granted, but we have no idea what an enormous technological innovation that was. All of a sudden, everybody could have clothes, like a lot of clothes. I mean, that's unbelievable. And it never was that way. And that's just because of industry, of industrialization. Now, of course, with industrialization, what came damage to the environment. With technology comes dangers. With technology comes, and so in a certain way, we live in Cain's world. We live in Cain's world, not Abel's world. Abel's world was a very calm world of shepherding in which life wasn't too complicated. But Cain's world and his progeny's world is a world of technological development. And that's really where we live. And if you think about it, we don't come from Abel, who we might think of as the good guy. We all come from Cain. That's it. It's he's the and on some level we take after him and his progeny, with this sort of sense of building cultures and cities and societies and technological advancement. But the Torah comes to tell us, and that's why this is right there at the beginning of Genesis. In a certain sense, the rest of the Torah is there as a foil for this. There's a danger in all of this. There's a danger of becoming desensitized. There's a danger in becoming too haughty. There's a danger in just becoming overly focused on wealth and on power. And all of that is the danger, of course, of that comes with societal quote, progress. And so the Torah comes to the commandments come. For instance, the one of the things that we lose track of is the natural world, right? We don't, if you ever go outside of the city, you'll realize there are stars in the sky. You don't see stars really here. You don't see, there's a sensitivity we lose by living in cities and in technological culture. The And if you think about it, the commentaries point out that most blessings are not from the Bible, not from the Torah, only the blessing after you eat. But the rabbis of the Mishnah, of the oral tradition, put into place all these blessings that we say before we eat, blessings that we say after you go to the bathroom, blessings that you say when you see something amazing in the world. Why? Because there's such beauty in the world, but we just begin to take it for granted after a while. And so the function of blessings is there. The function perhaps of prayer is there to cultivate within us appreciation, to hone us into people who can, even while being involved in the and and it's actually something God wanted, right? Right at the beginning, what does God say to Adam and Eve? Right in the first chapter, God says, God makes the human being, blesses the human being, and then God says to the human being, right, you shall Peru Uruvu, be fruitful and multiply, and fill up the world and harness it, conquer it. Vikivshuha. The human being is supposed to conquer the world. The human being who is more technological, more in charge of the world, is more dignified. And on some level, Rabbi Soloveitchik points this out, is doing a commandment that's commanded right at the beginning of the Bible. But all of that, and God wants that. That's very clear from the beginning of Genesis. But all of that comes with enormous danger of the loss of self, of the loss of relationships, of the loss of appreciation, the loss of gratitude, the loss of humility, the loss of our sensitivity toward nature. And so the commentaries say that's what Maimonides is saying. And he's quoting the Talmud, actually, that the purpose of the commandments is to hone the human being, to develop the human being, what's called in Hebrew tsaref et habriyot. And and uh, and that is and that's what Maimonides and Nachmanides are pointing out here. I mean, we certainly see it with things like Shabbat. I mean, in nobody would have imagined, before electricity, how important Shabbat would be. I mean, Shabbat was very important in those days because people worked very hard. And we don't work so hard, so you might say to yourself, well, I don't do much work. Why do I need the Sabbath? I have a dishwasher. I have, no, I don't work very hard. I go rest on Wednesday or whatever. But the answer, of course, is that the Sabbath is much more than that. The Sabbath isn't really rest from labor. The Sabbath is rest from creative work. And in fact, I think it's easy to argue that it's more important today than it ever was, and that we are more removed from the things that the Sabbath gives us, from community, which the Sabbath provides, it removes us in an observant way. It really removes you from technology, it removes you from, right? It also says to us, there is a master of the universe, and you're not it, right? It says you don't have you don't have full jurisdiction over the world to just keep at your creation, to keep at your development of technology. Um, Many say it's true of, let's say, the laws of kosher also, right? The laws of kosher are they may, for Jews, they make Jews different, right? Non-Jews don't have very many laws about what to eat. They do have the law of not taking a limb from a living animal, but for Jews, it's much more than that. It's it's an enormous practice, that separates us, that makes us different, that makes us constantly aware of what we're eating. Um, right? There are commandments like putting a mezuzah on the doorpost, tying tefillin on the arm and the head, and the Bible's fairly clear about what those are for. To remember that there's one God, and so it's legitimate to say the commandments have reasons, and the reasons are to cultivate our own sensitivities, our own ethical and spiritual sensitivities, and to cultivate relationship between us and other people, and between us and God, and between us and ourselves. And that, I think, is what Maimonides is saying. I'm not saying there's no other opinions, but that, I think, is a very important element. Any questions on observance by ritual? I think there are lots of Jews who are inclined to say, well, I can be a Jew without ritual. I can be a Jew without having to keep all the commandments. Maybe there are commandments that are bothersome, that are perplexing to me, commandments that I think are backward. Um, so part of it is even though there are reasons for all the commandments, I don't think we would say there are denominations of Judaism that would say this, but I don't think that observant Jews would say that we can know the reasons, because there are many for which we don't know the reasons. There are chukim, which are a category of commandments that that we don't know the reasons for, and we may never know the reasons for. And but we still have to keep them. If we would do away with the commandments that we don't know the reasons for, then we would be making Judaism in our image instead of following Judaism. Yes. So the term mitzvah, the 613 mitzvot, mitzvah comes from the root word tzivui, litzaveh, which means commandment, command. Now it's interesting, by the way, the 10 commandments are not actually called commandments in the Torah. Ironically, right? We refer to all the commandments, as mitzvot. But the 10 commandments are actually called the Aseret Hadibrot, the 10 sayings, the 10 utterances. Even though they are commandments, but perhaps they're more than that, and that's why they're not necessarily called commandments. But we have a tradition that we have 613 commandments. How you count them up actually is the source of some argument. Not everybody agrees exactly what goes in the 613 commandments. It's about the same, but Maimonides talks a little bit about what goes into, how you decide which ones go in the list. Everybody has a list of 613. Now, the truth is, though, there are many, many more commandments. I mean, if you only did the biblical commandments of the Sabbath, it would be very small. But there's a tremendous amount of rabbinic commandments, rabbinic offenses, rabbinic decrees, and I think those are important because they help to preserve the observance. Shabbat. I mean, if you could make your, Nachmanides says this. He says, if you look in the Torah, it says, you shall do what is good and right in the eyes of God and people. So he says, why does the Torah have to tell you that? I mean, the Torah has all of these commandments. If you just follow the commandments, you'll be doing what's good and right. So he says, because you could be a bad person, a disgusting person, still keep all the commandments. You have to have an overarching commandment that commands you to be ethical. He says the same thing about a commandment in the Torah, Kedoshim to you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. So he says, just follow the Torah. Why do you have to have it tell you to be holy? He says, because the same thing, in our relationship with others and our relationship with God, you could keep the commandments, but you could really miss you have to go beyond the letter of the law to really cultivate. Rachel, you had your hand up? Rachel?
Sorry, I'm having trouble unmuting myself. I was double muted. So I found this discussion super interesting in terms of the purposes of the commandments, and it got me.
Can others hear Rachel? You can? Oh dear. Okay.
Oh no.
Let me. I don't know why I always have audio problems. Let me. Let me switch. Try talking again, Rachel.
Can you hear me now? No?
Try that.
Hello?
Try talking.
Uh-oh, I am talking.
You can hear her? But I can't. That's not good. I'm sorry about this. I'm gonna restart my computer and log back in. Because if I can't hear you, that's not good. I'll just be 1 minute. So you may have to log back in.